Hello, and welcome to the Center for Strength's Lunch and Learn featuring Dr. Keri Johns with CBT skills. The Center for Strength is a federally and state grant-funded resiliency center that was set up in the aftermath of the shooting at STEM School Highlands Ranch on May 7th, 2019. Our mission is to help our community move forward and heal and understand the tools that we all need to support ourselves in this lifelong journey. My name is Tammy Horlocker. I'm the activities coordinator here. Thank you so much for joining us today. Just want to say a little bit about Dr. Johns. She has helped our community in the past with our CBT skills workshops. I personally love CBT skills because it's something you can do at your desk and nobody else knows you're doing it. So when you're feeling overwhelmed, it's something that you can do for yourself without drawing attention to yourself. So Dr. Johns earned her undergraduate degree in psychology from the University of Tennessee in Knoxville and got her master's degree in clinical psychology from the University of Colorado at Denver. She then earned a doctorate in combined integral clinical and counseling psychology from the University of South Alabama and completed her pre-doctoral internship at Nebraska Western Iowa VA. She's done several fellowships working in spinal cord injury, geriatric rehabilitation, behavioral medicine, palliative care, home-based primary care, and women's clinic. She's worked in the recreation therapy at the Memphis VA to develop a sports psychology program for veterans preparing for the National Veterans Wheelchair Games. And like I said earlier, she's helped our community in the past. So Dr. Johns, I'm going to turn it over to you. And thank you for being here today.
Thank you for the introduction. It is lovely to be here today, and I love doing these community kind of outreach types of things and connecting with the community. So I'm going to share a PowerPoint that will go over some skills today that can be really helpful, especially in coping with just unhelpful thinking styles when we start to worry or just ruminate on something that we just can't get off of our mind. So let me share this. And I am currently in private practice at CBT Denver. So there's our lovely little logo over here. And I'm a clinical health psychologist. And so I focus a lot on general mental health, but as well as things that affect our physical health too, chronic conditions, insomnia, chronic pain, all kinds of things. So we will kind of jump right in here. My goal today is to give you some skills in coping with unhelpful thinking and kind of challenge our thoughts. So the C in CBT stands for cognitive. And the cognitive model looks something like this. Something happens, and then that triggers a thought, and then that triggers a feeling, and then we respond to it. Sometimes it doesn't happen in exact this order. Sometimes there's a situation, and then we have a feeling, and then we think about it, and then there's a behavior, or situation, emotion, and behavior, and it happens in that direction. But there's still a belief or an underlying thought that exists that's reinforcing that emotion. There's a reason that we're angry because we have a belief about the situation or the person. We might be sad because we have a thought or belief about something that happened. And so my goal today is to really focus on these thought pieces because that thought, depending on how we handle it, can either exaggerate the emotion a little bit more, add other layers to the emotion, so that now we're not just feeling anxious, but now we're feeling mad at ourselves for feeling. And so there's a lot that we can do kind of around the thoughts to help manage some of the emotional responses and then our behaviors that follow that. So unhelpful thinking styles, a lot of you have probably heard about some of these things. I mentioned, I think I mentioned catastrophizing already. That's a pretty common one. But these are some examples of things that people often do that are usually unhelpful. So like mental filter, just kind of focusing on one part of the situation and ignoring the rest of the situation. So, you know, I made a mistake, so everything was horrible, even though maybe I got a bunch of compliments afterwards about all the things that went well. And really just dwelling on the one thing that as I hoped. Jumping to conclusions. So that's, you know, kind of jumping ahead or making an assumption. So mind reading is kind of assuming we know what people think. which we're not really great at, even when we think we are good at it, or even when we really know somebody. They may or may not be thinking what we're assuming. Fortune telling, so just kind of jumping ahead and assuming that we know what's going to happen and what the future is. And again, most of us are not actually great at that. We might get lucky once or twice and be right, but generally speaking, that we can't tell the future. None of us are fortune tellers. And catastrophizing, and so kind of blowing things into like a bigger deal than it might actually be when you look at it more closely. So some examples: oh, they must think I'm stupid. I just know I'm going to mess this up. Kind of that fortune telling, I just know this is going to go badly. Catastrophizing, everybody's going to laugh at me and I'll never be able to show my face again. Any variety of thoughts similar to that. Personalizing, so kind of taking it all on yourself, and over taking responsibility for something. So when we personalize, we often over apologize for things. That's usually the behavior that follows that. And sometimes we, maybe deserve a piece of that pie, but we don't deserve the whole pie of responsibility. So I think it's helpful to reevaluate that. Black and white thinking, which I'm guilty of, and a lot of us are guilty of, when we get into this kind of all or none place. So the example here is, if it's not perfect, then it's a failure. When really there's a whole lot of gray in between there, in between perfection and failure. So trying to kind of find that and find the nuance in that rather than being all or none about it. Shoulding and musting. So I should never make mistakes. I should have prepared better. I need to control my feelings. We don't often say must in our current language, but we do use that term of musting when it's like, I have to, I need to. And so we put higher expectations on ourselves than maybe is realistic. And I like to joke sometimes if we catch ourselves kind of doing a whole bunch of should statements, oh, I should have done this, or should have done that, or I should be doing this. It's kind of helpful to just break it up a little bit and be like, oh, I'm shoulding all over myself right now. And it just makes you laugh a little bit. And that sometimes in and of itself can lighten our emotion attached to the shoulds. Even if we're still upset, it still just makes it a little bit easier to cope with that feeling upset. Overgeneralizing and labeling, so kind of taking one thing and making, applying it to every situation. So never, always, anytime we're using those words, we're usually overgeneralizing. So I never work out for me. You always do this. I never do that. I never do well. So anytime we're using that word, I think that's usually a good idea of, okay, maybe I'm overgeneralizing right now. That may not be true that I always mess up. There are examples when that is not true. I'm such an idiot. So kind of that labeling piece where I just kind of take one thing and I apply it to myself, or other people, and kind of buy into it. Emotional reasoning. So basing, this happens kind of with the fortune telling as well, but just basing something on how we feel. So I just know something bad is going to happen. Like I can feel it. So sometimes people will have a lot of worries and it's attached to anxiety and they think it's going to happen just because they're feeling it. And oftentimes it doesn't happen. Rarely it probably actually happens the way that their anxiety thinks it's going to happen. Magnifying and minimizing. So kind of magnifying the positive attributes of other people and minimizing your own. So kind of the example here is, my friend deserved that award. They're so smart and hardworking, but I was only considered for it because I got lucky. And so you kind of minimize your own stuff and assume everybody else is better or have worked harder or done something. They have some sort of attribute that it's hard for you to accept. So these are the ones that are probably the most common that I think are helpful to look out for and just be aware of. Sometimes it's helpful just to go, okay, that was a catastrophizing, and just labeling it and being able to kind of take a step back from it. So what to do with some of these thoughts? I'm going to talk a little bit about the ACT approach, which ACT is acceptance and commitment therapy. It's under the CBT umbrella. And some of the ways that ACT has you deal with these thoughts is to kind of more just ask yourself, is this helpful? And to try to defuse from them when they're not helpful. And the idea is that when we're fused with these thoughts, they usually become less helpful, and we're a little bit more rigid in our thinking, which keeps us from having different perspectives and being able to engage in things in the way that we want them to do and be able to connect to kind of what's important to us. So this idea is that when we're fused with these thoughts, we believe them, we buy them, they're truth, they're important, they're wise, we have to listen to them, and we just kind of buy what our mind is giving us. And we just assume that the catastrophizing thought is true, or the mind reading thought is true, or the shoulds are true, or whatever it might be. So when we're able to defuse from these thoughts, we're able to identify that they're just a thought. I can have all kinds of thoughts and they may or may not be true. They may or may not be important, even if they are true. They're definitely not something that we have to listen to, and they may or may not actually be wise either. So being able to just acknowledge that it's just a thought, and this is, is this actually helpful for me? So oftentimes people will come and they'll say, okay, well, if I diffuse, but like, what if my thought is true? There's some truth here, and I don't know that I can just let it go or stop thinking about it. And so I think this is a helpful kind of way to walk through this. And some of this language is borrowed from The Happiness Trap, which is a great book on ACT that's kind of a self-help type of book that focuses on these skills, if you're interested in more. But the idea is this something I've heard before? Do I gain anything useful from listening to it again? Does it make me take effective action in my life? So even if this thought is true, does it make me more effective at like moving towards a goal? So maybe like I want to learn to ski, and it is true that I'm bad at skiing. Just dwelling on being bad at skiing is not going to motivate me to try it and to do it. It's probably going to demotivate me, and I'm not going to be able to, be effective in achieving my goal of being able to ski, right? So that's kind of a silly example, but I think that is helpful to think about. It might be true to some degree, but it doesn't mean that it has to stay true, and it doesn't mean that we have to listen to it, because it may keep us from doing what we want. What do I get from buying it? So if I buy the thought, what do I get any benefit out of it? Is it helpful? Does it help me be the person I want to be? Does it help me build the sort of relationships that I like? If I have the thought of, she must not like me because she didn't ask me if I wanted to go to that concert with her, or whatever. Does me buying that thought, does that help me build the relationship that I want with that friend? Probably not, because if I believe that thought and buy into it, whether or not it's true, I'm probably going to pull away from that friendship. And then I'm definitely not going to, develop that friendship in the way that I want. And so maybe it's true, maybe it's not. But if I, buy it, I pull away. If I don't buy it and acknowledge that's just a thought, let's see what's actually going on here. Let's reach out and invite them to something. I might be able to build a relationship that's more meaningful, and kind of move past it more effectively. Does it help me connect with what I truly value? So yeah, does it let me do the things that I really want to do, that are really important for me to have a meaningful life? So I think those are always helpful questions. If the thought is true or not, these things are probably more important than whether or not it's actually a true thought. So ways to defuse from some of these thoughts. So just the simple idea of recognizing the difference between having a thought and buying into the thought. And so I like the language of I'm having the thought that, because it creates a little bit of space between ourself and the thought. And we're acknowledging that I am not my thoughts. My thoughts exist as a part of me, but they are not me. They're just thoughts. So the idea of, I'm such an idiot versus I'm having the thought that I'm an idiot. I can treat it a little bit differently, and it might give me a little bit more wiggle room to figure out what I want to do with that thought and the feeling attached to that thought or connected to it. So I really like this idea if we start to catch those thoughts, okay, I'm having the thought that, and just being more observant as to what our mind is giving us. Just labeling the thought sometimes is really helpful for a lot of people. Okay, that's a catastrophizing thought, or that's a labeling thought, or that's a mind reading thought. And that also can give us a little bit of space to figure out what we want to do with that thought, and whether or not we actually want to buy it, or believe it, or if there's other thoughts that we want to invite to the table that might be, a little bit better perspective on a situation. naming the story. I really like this idea too, especially if it's a thought that keeps coming up again. An idiot a lot, it's kind of helpful to say, oh, there's that I'm an idiot story again. And it just kind of creates the idea of like, this is a story. It may or may not actually be true. Just, stories that we read in real life. And that it's a narrative that our mind is kind of giving us. And it might only be one version of what's happening, or it's not the full picture, or it's missing a lot of perspective on the situation. So that's a way to kind of separate from it too. I also really like this idea of, kind of a thanks, but no thanks. So I'll use anxiety for an example. All of our feelings have a purpose. They all exist for a reason. They're all trying to kind of protect us and help us survive in the world. And oftentimes they're not super helpful when they go overboard, or when we're really like ruminating on something we don't have that much control over, or it's not something that we need to worry about just yet. And so anxiety, I think of as our threat detector. And so it's kind of there to feel out anything that might go wrong. And sometimes it's a little overprotective. And so I kind of think of it as, thanks, I got this. I appreciate you watching out for me, but I'm good, kind of idea. So you can kind of acknowledge it of like, that's my anxiety talking. It's trying to watch out for me right now. But this is important to me, or this is something I want to do, and I want the practice, or I want the experience, or I want to connect to this person, or whatever it might be that feels important at the time. And so kind of thinking about it as like, if you have a friend that's really worried about you, but they're a little overprotective, or a parent who might be overprotective, but it's coming from a good place and they're worried about you, it's kind of that idea of like, thanks, I appreciate your worry, and I got this. So the thanks but no thanks is really nice sometimes. Imagining your thoughts like a pop-up message. So using some visual imagery for our thoughts can be really nice sometimes. So the idea that, everybody, if you ever shop online, there's always that pop-up of, oh, put your email address in and save 10%. And most of us have probably visited that site before. And so we just immediately see it, X out of it, and then move on. And so sometimes we can use that imagery for our thoughts of, okay, that popped up, it's in our way. Let's imagine closing out of it and then kind of moving on with our day. And so we're not necessarily ignoring our thought, we're acknowledging its presence and then just deciding, yeah, this isn't something I want to engage in right now. It's in my way. I want to do what I was going to do. Imagining kind of your thoughts in a silly voice can also be really helpful. So if I take the, I'm such an idiot thought, most people can imagine a Mickey Mouse voice. And so if you take that thought, I'm such an idiot, and you imagine it and take a moment to do this, and the sound of Mickey Mouse's voice, it probably sounds a little sillier. You might not take it as seriously. And so you can do this with any cartoon character, or even I've had people choose like characters from The Office or other kind of things that they've resonated with. And it just is a helpful way for them to create a little bit of space between them and the thought and defuse. Singing the thought is also a way to do that. I will spare your ears and not sing, but it is a helpful thing if you can kind of come up with a tune that's pretty simple. You can do like a lullaby tune or like a happy birthday tune, and just sing the thought in your mind or even out loud. And it just changes your relationship with what your mind is giving you. And so I'm also going to do kind of an exercise here. And this one is a mindful thinking exercise. And so when we practice diffusion, mindfulness is a really great tool for doing that, and being able to create a little bit of space and practice observing our thoughts without judging them. And so that's a big part of this diffusion piece, is that we want to not judge. We want to be able to observe what's going on, and we also want to pull away judgment so that we're not buying into or even thinking good or bad, and just trying to kind of remove that judgment piece and just go, oh, that's interesting, and approach it with some curiosity. And so this is an exercise that I think is really helpful for doing this, and it's useful for if there's some visual imagery elements too that I really like in doing this. And there's also some different ones. So I really like this one, The Leaves on a Stream. I've had people do different ones. The Clouds in the Sky is another popular one, where you imagine watching your thoughts go across the sky, and placing them on clouds and letting them float on by like you would a cloud. There's all kinds of different great imagery out there, but I really like the leaves on a stream, especially since we live in such an environment with a lot of nature involved. So I'm going to ask everybody to sit comfortably in a supportive but relaxed posture. And just take a couple deep breaths. And when you're ready, you can close your eyes, feeling a little bit more centered with each breath. And I'm going to ask you to bring up an image of a stream. It can be a place you've been to before, or a place you've just created in your mind. And imagine yourself sitting next to the stream as vividly as you can, letting yourself become quiet. And as we sit by the stream, we're going to practice noticing the thoughts that come up. Some of these thoughts might be visual images. They might be words or sounds. And anything that shows up is okay. With each thought that you notice, I want you to imagine placing that thought on a large leaf and then letting it float on down the stream. We'll continue to do this for the next several moments. Just noticing what our mind brings. Imagine placing it on a leaf and letting it float away. The same thought might come again, and that's okay. Just let this thought float on by. You might even have the thought that this is a silly exercise. And you can imagine placing that thought on a leaf as well. Just letting it go. Not engaging with any specific thoughts. So noticing with curiosity. Placing them on a leaf. And letting them float on down the stream. As we practice this exercise, you'll notice that thoughts come and thoughts will also go. But we can notice our thoughts and let them float away without a lot of effort or control. Simply letting them go with the imagery. Continue to do this for the next few moments. And then whenever you're ready, just take a couple deep breaths. And then return your attention to the room around you. Okay. Well, that is a great exercise. There's a lot of, if you YouTube, Google it. There's a lot of recorded versions of that, of the leaves on the stream, if you liked it and want to have it. handy for you in the future, or using this recording as well for that. But it's just kind of a nice grounding experience using the imagery to help your brain let go of what's coming up if it's not that helpful or useful. That is what I have for you all today. Hopefully those are some helpful skills. If you catch yourself kind of struggling with some thoughts that are just not as helpful as you would like them to be, or ruminating or worrying or whatever it is that you might be experiencing. This is my contact information. If you need it in the future, feel free to reach out to us here at CBT Denver. And I will hand it back over to you, Tammy.
Dr. Johns, thank you so much for being with us today. This recording will live on our YouTube channel, and we'll send a message out when that's available. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now.